Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining. We're here to talk about ReFi Summer, why the regenerative finance movement is taking off. And I know a few of you are in Paris, have been, and apart from the crazy temperatures, it is really true. ReFi is taking off. There's been crazy interest in the whole community to talk about regenerative finance. And while we may still need some time to agree on the exact definition, there's already hundreds, if not thousands, of people working in this space. Want to shout out to the team for putting. This is always one of my favorite events. When they reached out and said, "Will you come and talk about ReFi?" I was like, "Yes, absolutely." And maybe we'll start off with some quick introductions and then dive right in. I have here with me Ashley from Resource, Craig from the Climate Collective, and Luke from Kolektivo. And I would like to ask you guys just to maybe give a quick intro about yourselves and your project, and where you're dialing in from.
Cool, I can start. So I'm Ashley. Normally I live in New Mexico. I'm in Paris this week. I've been in Europe doing a lot of research and meeting with the ReFi community over the last few weeks as part of this, big transition. And Resource is a protocol for multilateral exchange and mutual credit. We built on Celo. We did a pilot last year in the US, and we're currently in a phase of transitioning to partner with people who want to launch these types of networks that essentially enable people to access credit without needing capital upfront.
I'll go next. Craig Wilson, the lead at the Climate Collective. What we do at the Climate Collective is three things, all sort of driven by the idea that climate is a mass coordination problem and crypto can be a mass coordination tool. So we do this through three ways. Through capital, we have a grant giving program where we're providing capital for folks that are operating at the intersection of crypto and climate. Two, we're a coalition of 17 companies, of which Kolektivo is one of them. And we advocate for those companies. We provide a nexus of partnership for them and spend a lot of time. And the last one is education. We want climate people who are crypto curious and crypto people who are climate curious to realize that this is where they should be spending their time, effort, talent, and energy.
Wonderful. I'm so excited to be part of this group. I'm Luke, born and raised in the Caribbean on the small island of Curacao. Got involved into crypto, blockchain, Web3 in 2016. Started the first impact DAO in 2019, named CuraDAO on the island of Curacao. And from that, Kolektivo emerged, which I'm now the founder of. We're building a toolkit for local regenerative economies, really enabling local economies to exist, but also for the locals to own them and have a stake in the economies that they're creating. We're getting live with the first MVP of this full imagination on the island of Curacao in October with a ReFi Festival.
Fantastic. I want to talk about that more, but maybe before we really dive in, let's agree on a definition for ReFi. I think that's been something people have been trying to do this week, and I will say for folks who've been in the space for DeFi Summer and remember the early beginnings, there's a lot of the same excitement, but maybe even more so because this time we're really bringing real world use cases, right, to Web3. And to me, when I try to explain ReFi to someone who's new to it, I describe it as, okay, we have decentralized finance now, but how do we grow decentralized finance and make sure that there are positive externalities? And those can be with respect to the environment. And so a lot of the focus around ReFi has been with respect to climate. And I think there's some great examples already. But I also see it more broadly with respect to the communities in which we operate, in which we live, right? And even with respect to the individual. And so given that we're really, kind of iterating on a new financial system that can have lots of new features, right, that the current traditional financial system doesn't have, we have a chance to build these positive externalities right into the system at the protocol level. And so maybe putting it to you guys, how do you explain ReFi to someone who hasn't heard about it? And maybe if you can give an example with respect to your project or what you're working on, or Craig, in your case for the Climate Collective, pick one of your favorite use cases of some of the members, of how that kind of actually translates to at the product level.
Well, I guess since I was called out there for a specific use case, I'm happy to go first. I think my definition of it is it's everything that you mentioned, Rene, but also what's good about it is that it helps align incentives. So I think in many cases, more traditional finance has ignored a lot of the externalities that exist in many in many industries, and so aligning those incentives is a way for us to make sure that we're looking out for the common good and making sure that all stakeholders are rewarded. And so, a good example of something that we've funded is we've given a grant to an organization called AIRS, which stands for Automated Incentives for Regenerative Stewardship. And what they're trying to do is say that you are a farmer that is using conventional farming techniques and you want to move to organic or regenerative farming techniques. How do you make sure that you're rewarded for using those? And so if we can understand how much carbon is being put into the ground for that switch, we can actually then and verify that, we can actually then sell that as a credit and be able to reward those farmers for moving from organic or from conventional to organic to regenerative. So like it aligns incentives and also incentivizes those folks to make better decisions.
It's a beautiful example.
Yeah, for me, like the ReFi movement has been cool because it's activated a lot of the early activist energy that was present around early blockchain, like around the launch of the Ethereum white paper. Before there was a lot of things built, there was a lot of discussion around what I would say was sort of in the ReFi space. And a lot of that early potential got a little bit like shoved off to the side. It started being called social impact and blockchain, and the blockchain became something else. And I think that ReFi is, at its best, what we could say is happening is we're realizing, wait, we built a bunch of stuff that kind of replicated the old system. It did make it more transparent. We can see what's going on. Ethan Buckman has a great quote where he says, you can easily see who's getting fucked over more now that we've, made it all transparent. But the next phase is like, what are we actually doing here in terms of those early goals around decentralization? So what I'd like to see more of is actually rebranding the space and our work under those umbrellas and kind of distinguishing this from, are we really replicating the old system just with new technology? Or are we figuring out what do new systems look like that actually decentralize our access to building wealth and power? So for Resource, what we learned last year, we built this pilot in the US. We built a system where people can access credit. They can use that to pay for everyday goods and services, and they pay that back with their own goods and services by sales to a community. So with that model, what we've observed that by launching it in the US, there was a lot of interest in terms of like the revolutionary long-term perspective. In terms of the day-to-day needs that it's solving for people, it's still a difficult transition because a lot of people still have a perception that the system that we've built in the West is actually is working for them really well. And it's there in the future. So I think that right now, the goals of the ReFi space should be to help people understand actually the system needs to change And so this is an opportunity for us to start to build things that are more long-term. So we're going to start to do pilots more in emerging markets, and actually sending some of our core team on the ground in Nairobi to do partnerships in places where the systems actually aren't functioning, and learn how to build better systems in those environments.
It's almost a perfect transition to Luuk and the work that Kolektivo is doing.
I definitely agree. I think that this combination of values and incentives is really what regenerative means for me. It's a new culture, a new way at looking what the foundation of development and human coordination should look like. One of the biggest pain points that I experienced back home like 5-6 years ago was that there was no funding or pathway for public goods or impact in any case. It was undervalued and underappreciated, which led to a lot of people that still had the purpose of doing good, only doing it in the weekends as a hobby and not being able to do it full time. That was one of the biggest problems that I wanted to solve, is really how can we get more people that want to do good full time instead of just as a hobby kind of privileged thing. What I also think ReFi does really is this concept of regeneration. It's keeping this purposeful mission and making sure that every iteration improves our chances of creating future more impact. I think one part of kind of how we explain it to people, I often refer to the SDGs as a common ground, as something that people already know, and saying that we're embedding sustainable development, or even better, regenerative development, into local economies, really creating these coordination vehicles that really take care of not just nature, but also human needs. I think that's my final kind of touch point of what ReFi is to people. I think it's this real worldness of blockchain, of DeFi, which also forces us to think more about user experience, about cultures, about what is needed. I think that's a segue to Kolektivo, why we think we need a toolkit for local regenerative economies instead of a globalized currency or a globalized system. Because over the past years, we've realized how different cultures can be and how those cultures reflect to different needs. So creating a framework is necessary, but also allowing the local inhabitants and the local needs to really be at the center of the system and decide how it should look like, how it should value, what it should reward, instead of someone like me who maybe doesn't understand the local context as good, being the one that decides what the system should look like. So those modularities, I think, really are one of the key pieces as well in enabling true change and true impact.
No, that's great. I want to maybe, and I know there's a lot of people listening who are either coming into the space as builders or are investing in Web3, but maybe new to ReFi. And I think Ashley put it well, like ReFi itself is not new, but we now have a movement, right, where we can sort of come together and just create awareness for the work that's happening. I mean, if I look back to the beginnings of Cello, the initial motivation, the initial white paper, it's squarely ReFi, but back then we didn't really have a good term for it, right? I think the work that really many in the ReFi space, yesterday was at a conversation with Kevin Owocki, and obviously Greenpilled has been a really big way of just getting people to pay attention. Oh, there's something here, but actually I agree that even now, as this is taking off, there's more interest, but there's maybe still a little bit the stigma that, oh yeah, this is kind of impact, and this is kind of a niche within Web3. But I think we in ReFi, in the ReFi space, right, we're like, no, actually, this is where this is it. This is the ship. This is bigger, right, if it works, than what we have to date. Because in DeFi, really all we're doing is we're moving, artificial value that sits in tokens on chain around, right, in a bunch of financial constructs, many of them not too dissimilar from what we have in traditional finance. With ReFi, we're bringing real world assets on chain, and we're allowing for applications that are currently not happening, right? Whether they're empowering communities to extend mutual credit to each other, like in the case of research, or whether they're allowing farmers to use future carbon credits as collateral to switch to regenerative practices. And I think I think that is maybe a little bit of a leap for a lot of people, because, you know, in sort of the traditional world, impact investing or people building impact ventures, it was always like, oh yeah, okay, this is nice. Yeah, you know, I'll give some money to this. But here, I think really what I think more and more people are realizing is that this is really a worthwhile future, all kind of moving towards, right? Every project, every Web3 project can be a ReFi project. And so maybe I want to kind of extend the question here. What are, if you're building a new protocol, if you're coming into the space, how should you think, what is a good framework when you guys look at projects, or as you're building your own projects, how do you kind of measure the regenerative nature of a project, or how do you make sure that what you're designing is as regenerative as it could be? How do you go about that? And I think Ashley mentioned pilots, which I think that's always a great way, right, to just see, hey, does this work? Does this actually benefit a community? But I wonder if you guys have come across frameworks or metrics or approaches even to that we could share here with sort of fellow builders, and then also with investors who are maybe looking at this and are like, oh yeah, you know, I get it. This can be 10x, 100x the size of DeFi, and maybe I should get involved. And this is not just about like having an impact, but I can make money too.
Yeah, I think I would love to take one first. So I mentioned the Sustainable Development Goals, and that's not because I think they're perfect, but I do know that the majority of the large stakeholders in the world have aligned with them. We're building towards them for 2030. I think 5 years ago, sustainability was still a meme and almost no company cared about it. You did corporate social responsibility, you did a sports event here and you're done. Now, 5 years later, if you don't have some sort of a strategy for carbon neutrality and kind of things like that, you're kind of not important anymore, especially millennials. They'll just not care about you. And I see this framework accelerating really fast as we get closer to 2030. People realize more and more how critical the situation is. And almost any resource not spent on saving and improving the world is wasted. It doesn't make sense to have 25 companies that can bring your food to your house in 2 minutes if we don't have streets to ride anymore because they're flooded. And I think that valuing of what is really important, we're really at a tipping point, I feel, right now, where more and more, not just institutions, but also individuals are realizing this is the only way forward. It's no longer, do we want to create impact or do we want to be perceived nice? It is mission critical for humanity now to care more about positive externalities and not destroying the world more. So I think that really is part of the foundation, is kind of, hey, this is not something that we or impact people are caring about. This is something that everybody should care about way more. And I'm pretty sure that the closer we get to 2030, the more critical this will become and the more resources you will see flowing to any solution that can create this positive impact. And then in terms of a framework specifically for ReFi, I was part of a group with PrimeDAO where we created a ReFi review framework. And we really looked at different parts. One part is really the impact on the ground, which honestly currently is still rather hard to quantify because there's so many different smaller niches in ReFi. But that's important, kind of looking, what are they actually doing on the ground? How do they monitor, review, and verify that? How is it reported? And on the other side, also looking at it almost like a startup evaluation. What does the team look like? What kind of funding do they have? What resources do they have? And also, how much does this project embody the values of ReFi? Looking at the team diversity. Is this a team that could greatly represent the needs of the world, or are they going to only build something for the specific nation that has specific needs? So we're looking at the impact frameworks, but also looking at how do you best embody ReFi, I think the way I would approach it.
It's awesome. Yeah, great shout out to PrimeDAO. I love that dashboard. it's really great what they're working on and putting together, and it's really advancing kind of even just understanding within the ecosystem of what's happening. So yeah, for folks listening, check out PrimeDAO. Ashley, I want to hear your answer, but maybe also, given that you've been in this space longer, have you seen kind of a shift in how, when you talk to investors, whether they're Web3 or just traditional, how they're looking at this?
I would say that the investors have more like followed where the innovation is going. I think that investors in the Web3 space in general have been more open to things that are experimental by the nature of it. I think that's a double-edged sword though, because it's also meant that because there's so much experimentation and ways to make money quickly that don't exist in the traditional markets, it's also allowed the like speculative aspects of the space to dominate conversations for a long time. So I think that's also why in the bear market, we're able to have these conversations with investors, which normally, for a project like Resource, we've had people that would look at what we're doing and say, oh, that touches the real world, that's too complicated. Like we've experienced a lot of that over the years. But I think going back to the question around a framework, I think what we need are frameworks that help us guide development rather than how do we measure impact at this stage. We're still really early. We're early because we haven't made a lot of progress, I think, in terms of implementation in really real ways in the space. And so I think the frameworks that we need are like, how do we actually transition to that space? So I'll put in the chat. We developed an initial framework that's at the bottom of this article that I wrote, which is about how do we basically create these principles to guide our development. And actually at the Cello Salon this week, we did a workshop and people participated. We edited the framework. We added some more principles. We broke down basically ideas for how we see applying this framework going forward. So I'm going to be continuing that work and doing these workshops at different events, and maybe even do some online stuff and help people understand more how to incorporate these types of principles into their work.
It's awesome. I'm not sure if there's a way for us for that link to pop up to the participants, but I'm sure the STB10X team can figure it out. But no, thanks for sharing that. I saw that. Craig, you have almost like an investor-like view. You're looking at sort of an ecosystem broadly with sort of a climate focus, but as you're looking at projects, even from a grant perspective, what are kind of the frameworks that you are applying to decide, who gets a grant and who are you supporting? And be curious to hear.
Yeah, I think, a lot of what we look at, and I would say just even before that is, obviously we look at the Climate Collective, we look at everything through a climate lens, and there's much more to climate than just carbon. So, taking into account when we're reviewing grants, we're thinking about what stakeholders are involved, who is being supported. But, when you're looking at these projects, I think just so people understand the size and the scope of this particular area is like, we're looking at climate, which has a lot of work to be done and has huge opportunity. And we're looking at people who are reinventing how the mechanics of finance can work. And so we're talking about an enormous, enormous opportunity. So I think when you explain that to investors, they start to understand it a little bit better. But when we're evaluating projects, we're looking at folks who have, I like to call it founder market fit, which is why are you the person who should be doing this particular project? And what that means and why that's important is because you're going to be able to get the stakeholders correct. You're going to be able to understand how to align these incentives, and you're going to think a lot more thoughtfully around how to execute this. I mean, Luke is a perfect example of someone who's working on Kolektivo Labs. He's born and raised in Curacao and knows all of the ins and outs of what needs to be done in that particular project. So, we also have a lot of other frameworks. We take from a lot of the more traditional frameworks and traditional literature from climate and try and apply a lot of that to what impact should look like.
It's helpful. Yeah, look, I mean, from a Cello Foundation perspective, our key interest right now is really to fund public goods that make it super easy for anyone to start regenerative finance project for their community, right? For sort of a problem that they care about. And oftentimes the bottlenecks are, or the things that are hard are things like on and off ramps, right? How do you allow someone in a certain, and especially given that this touches the real world, right? How do you allow someone to easily, for example, move value money into a system, right? And so we earlier this year launched an initiative called Connect the World, which is really looking to accelerate that, and not just, you know, in sort of with sort of some of the bigger kind of on and off from providers, but really going very deep into markets, into communities, to integrate and meet people where they are. And I think that also, you know, someone could be working on an on and off ramp in a small country, in a community, and provide a key building block, right, to other founders, entrepreneurs, builders, building, for example, a community currency. And so I think, to me, for people that are tuning in, whatever your passion is, right, you can be a key building block in this movement, and so definitely encourage everyone to kind of reach out and connect with fellow builders. Craig, you just said sort of carbon offsets, tokenized carbon offsets are just sort of the tip of the iceberg. Rephrasing a little bit, it wouldn't be a good ReFi panel if we weren't to dig into this a little bit. Actually, you know, for what it's worth, Klima brought a lot of attention, right, to this, and brought a lot of regular people into thinking about this. And I'm less interested in kind of doing sort of a post-mortem on Klima, but more interested to kind of hear from you, you know, what's there beyond sort of what the eye may catch, right? Is it, you know, okay, we can tokenize carbon offsets, bring them on chain, and we can trade them more efficiently, and but is there more to it? What is sort of what's kind of the thing that may not be obvious if you just looked at this for 5 minutes, and what is sort of the opportunity around it?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, Rene. And there's so much beyond carbon, but just a few things to think about. And I can point to even specific projects that are doing these things, is biodiversity. So there's a project called Simplex DNA that uses eDNA technology. They are trained academics in this. And so if they can get a sense of what the biodiversity in a specific area is by getting an air or a water sample. And so the difficult part about that is that you have to get to the place where you need the air and water sample. So how do you incentivize people to get to really difficult to reach places to understand how biodiversity changes over time? And so using Web3 mechanics, we can actually find those incentives. And so biodiversity is one. Tying, you know, there's, well, Luuk is working on a lot of really interesting things as well. You know, land conservation, land stewardship. You can tie, you know, if you can tie these assets on chain, you open up so much more than just carbon. So there's incredible potential beyond, and you just kind of have to scratch. I think you're right, Rene. You just have to scratch the surface a little bit to get there. But there's been some fantastic applications, and we're seeing even more that are way out there that we think are really exciting.
Great. Awesome. Yeah, and I mean, even around carbon, I feel we are barely scratching the surface, right, of having you know, a carbon credit on chain as a building block in sort of a decentralized finance kind of ecosystem, right? That opens up opportunities that there's a lot of smart teams kind of building with that building block, right, and creating kind of using this as a primitive to implement new use cases. And that, I think, could be as simple as just having it be collateral, right, for stakeholder loan, but it could also, it could go much broader, right, and open up I think this is what we've seen with DeFi. It's really hard to predict these things because we are often kind of just anchored in comparing, oh, you know, well, here's how carbon credits have been traded traditionally, and sure, it's opaque, it's complex, and, you know, this will bring transparency and liquidity and make this market more efficient. But what's much harder to kind of estimate or guess is like, now that you have kind of a liquid on-chain market in an asset, right? What other use cases does this open up? And to me, that's been really exciting that we're not necessarily just looking to kind of improve upon what's been done in Web2 or sort of in sort of traditional finance, but we're really opening up a whole new world of use cases. Ashley, you brought up sort of bear market, and that there's just because of the bear market now more of a shift to real world projects. I wanted to ask you kind of generally also for folks listening, how do you see the current market environment? How is it affecting the ReFi movement? Is this slowing us down, or maybe it's accelerating the movement, right? And maybe also just kind of some thoughts on people that are curious, right? That may heard about Web3 and we're looking to get involved as there was a lot of excitement, half a year ago, and they're like, oh well, is this still real? Is this still something that I should spend, or invest in my kind of my time, my money? How do you see it? Like, is this should we all take a break and come back when the next bull run happens, or what does this bear market mean for ReFi?
Yeah, I think in terms of investment in Web3, it's not for the faint of heart, and unfortunately, a lot of projects outside of the ReFi space, for the most part, have promoted it as though it's this, amazing new thing that's already built, that already works, and you can put your money in it and it'll be great. And that narrative has been super problematic for, everyday folks who aren't in the space. And, for the most part, has taken advantage of a lot of people, and a lot of people have lost a lot of money. And so that's kind of like the general narrative that crypto has brought to the world. That's unfortunate for us in ReFi, right? Because we are actually trying to use the technology to do real things, build real infrastructure. And so we have, in the bear market, a lot of narratives to overcome, which is why I'm a fan of actually rebranding away from things like crypto and talking about what we're doing in a different light. So I think that the bear market is a good time for us to do that. I think secondly, the idea of investment in the space and impact investment. Impact investment traditionally is seen as you can put your money in something that has lower returns, that are relatively safe, that exist at scale, that have been aggregated over the past few years. That's also very problematic because the real experimentation and innovation on the ground that needs to happen to build new systems is very difficult to get funded in that context. If you talk to a lot of people in emerging markets, to be able to build something from a pilot phase to something that's scalable, that gets that traditional impact investment, there's a huge gap that traditional finance isn't closing. So I think our best opportunity in ReFi is to close that gap, broadly speaking. Doing those pilots, using the token systems and new funding models to help more people participate in ways to start to build things that are more long-term. And I think that ultimately to do that, we have to start being more honest with people that this is long-term, this is revolutionary, this is risky, but not risky in a sense of high risk, high reward, in the sense of high impact, like high change in actual day-to-day lives of ourselves, long-term, of new systems. And in order to do this, we need to take it slower. We need to kind of push off this idea that we're going to get rich quick, and more so like we're going to build real infrastructure that lasts. So I think there's a lot of community building, narrative building, and shifts that need to happen in this phase. And actually the bear market's suited really well for that.
That's awesome. Maybe a quick follow-up, and also extending that to Luuk and Craig. And Luuk, I want to hear, you mentioned the Kolektivo Festival in the beginning. I want everyone to hear more about that as well. What is a if someone is like, oh yeah, man, these projects, like, how do I get involved? Like, this is awesome. I want to be part of this movement. What's sort of your advice? What is a good next step someone should take who, after this panel, wants to get involved? And maybe Ashley, just share that with us, and then we'll pass it over to Luke.
Yeah, so for us, definitely on resource.finance, you can find where you can follow along our Discord and our Twitter, which is where we're posting updates around ways that community can get involved in our projects, and particularly the framework there around how to integrate ReFi more into their work. And then ideally, we'll be doing some more workshops where people can come participate and learn about the framework and help edit it and move it forward.
That's awesome. Luke, tell us more about the Curacao Festival.
Yeah, let me do the Curacao Festival first. So we're launching Kolektivo, the first MVP, in October, and then on October 21st and 22nd, we're hosting a 2-day festival on the island to not just celebrate the launch, but also bring together different ReFi thought leaders and merge that with the local environment that will be running this pilot for the coming years. So if you're interested in ReFi, we still have a 50% discount code live right now. I'll circulate some links, but you can also find it on the Kolektivo Twitter. Maybe going back a little bit to what we're discussing before, I think Ashley is completely right in suggesting follow us first, engage with us first. In the early days of DeFi, everything was rushed. It was like, jump into our Discord now and tell me what you want to do and I'll give you a job. And like, I think this was another big mistake of this bull market, was getting everybody involved with everything, which then led to nothing happening. People just arguing and saying good morning in chats, and which is not the hard work that needs to be done. I really think that the first step is taking a weekend off or the week off. Tell your boss not going to work and just read and absorb and think what kind of impact you want to have, what type of values you represent, and then looking for the projects that embody that, and then slowly engaging with those projects instead of me suggesting you now jump into my project, go to my Discord and do ABCD. Which I think is a really good part of this bear market. It's really allowing us to slow down. I was involved in the early DeFi days, and there every 3 months, there was a new rotation towards the next cool thing, from fruit tokens to then this, to then that. And then I think we have done that first wave of crazy experimentation, and we cannot expect builders to pivot or anybody to pivot again in a 2 to 3 month time span. It's literally you ship something and then you need to already think what you should ship in another 3 weeks. So I think, yeah, really taking the time, taking really in what you want to mean and considering this as a long-term investment, not a 1-year thing or a 2-year thing. This is for the decades to come, and potentially the whole future of humanity will be built on ReFi. So don't rush in, take your time, but make sure that when you get in, you're here for real, because it's going to be a crazy ride for the next years.
That's awesome advice. Craig, anything to add? How do you get involved?
Yeah, I think I would echo everything that was said. I think to get involved with us, we really look for people to reach out to us. The whole point of what we do with our grant making program, as I mentioned, we have these kind of 3 pillars, right? Give out grants, we have a community, and then we educate people to realize that this is where they should be spending their time and talent. And hopefully that last piece then feeds into the first piece. That's our little climate collective flywheel. So once you go on your journey, like Luke mentioned, we really encourage you to think about what types of projects you want to engage with. And if what you are thinking about needs, grant capital and needs capital for you to be able to explore, find ways to reach out to us. I think what's really been amazing about this community too, as Ashley mentioned, is like, hey, come hop in our Discord. Luke's saying, hey, learn and engage, is how welcoming everyone is. And so it's much easier to engage than it is in other communities, in other sort of industries. So raise your hand and reach out, and you'll find, I think, that folks are really, really happy to have whatever it is that you're great at.
Yeah, I also maybe just add to this, and then just having some of us here together in Paris right now, nothing replaces that kind of real world connection. And there's events all over the world, really, in some of the most remote and smallest communities. Sorry about the background noise. And that's a really great way, right? Just to have a conversation. I agree with Luke. Don't rush in the first thing you see, but like take your time, read, meet the people that are working on these projects. And there's urgency. We gotta work on this, but there's also this is a marathon. It's not a sprint, right? And if we want to be really moving the needle, you know, we will need to pace ourselves, right? And really build kind of infrastructure systems that have the resilience to survive not just, you know, a crypto winter, but really us and sort of generations to come. And I think that is a much harder problem, but from a value generation, from sort of the impact, right? That's really, I think, what we're all here for. So we're really almost at time here. I want to thank my fellow panelists, Ashley, Luke, Craig. It was wonderful to be with you and chat ReFi. Would encourage everyone who's listened and is interested to learn more to reach out. We're a friendly bunch. There's a whole ecosystem that's very welcoming, you know, around this movement. And yeah, thanks again to STB10X for hosting. And probably in the next year, every panel is going to be about ReFi. That's my prediction. And with that, I'll yeah, say goodbye and thanks everyone for tuning in.
Thanks so much, everybody. Have a good day.
Thank you all. Really appreciate it.
Yeah.